Hello and welcome to Outlaw Bookseller with me, Stephen E. Andrews, writer, collector, bookseller. Today I'm in Caerleon, Monmouthshire, South Wales, the birthplace of weird fiction author Arthur Machen. But today I want to talk about a precursor of Machen, an American writer who was the beginning of the lineage of the horror novel. He inspired everyone who came after him: Poe, Hawthorne, Melville, Lovecraft, Clark Ashton Smith, Richard Matheson. Even now, the likes of Stephen King, Dan Simmons and others owe him a debt. I'm speaking of Charles Brockden Brown, the godfather of psychological horror and the master of the true uncanny. Sigmund Freud's essay on the uncanny, which in German is rendered unheimlich, which means unhomely, which within it of course has the word homely, pinpoints exactly what the uncanny is. It's the strange and the bizarre and the frightening, hidden in the ordinary, in the homely, making it unhomely. And it's in this sense that Brockden Brown is important. There is no supernatural horror in his work, but instead psychological horror and the uncanny, as strange things happen in realms which appear domestic and normal, and yet because of when and where Brockden Brown was writing, those milieus themselves are to us inherently uncanny and strange. They are tales of somnambulists and voice throwers, of murder and deception, of hidden levels of reality, of disturbed dreamful sleep. Charles Brockden Brown was born in 1771, 5 years before the United States became independent, and he grew up in Philadelphia during a time of great political turmoil as the new country had developed its civic identity. He was supposedly going to follow his father into the legal profession, but his literary ambitions resulted in him becoming the first professional American author, that is, somebody who made their living by writing. And it is in this sense that he is most often remembered and described as the father of American letters, and his career began as a writer in 1793. He was widely admired by his successors in the US, such as Melville, Hawthorne and Poe, who drew on his mastery of psychological suspense and his ability to present narratives with a number of layers of interpretation. So from the very start, American literature took a step towards modernism through Brockden Brown's influence, while also planting the first tree in the forest of American Gothic and horror fiction. I can honestly say that his works are amongst the most striking and head-shaking books I've ever read in decades of reading SF, horror, fantasy and classic fiction. While numerous critics have written at length about the political aspects of Brown's work that stem from the times he grew up in, and they are undoubtedly important aspects of his work, in this video we're going to look beyond these into his influence upon the literature of the uncanny and even science fiction writing. For alongside his journalism, essays and other works, between 1798 and 1799, Brockden Brown produced 4 novels, and while other works were lost or came later, it is in this short period that he produced his most stunning books, the writings which are often described as Gothic novels. There was Arthur Mervyn, a novel which throws into sharp relief his ability to reshape the American countryside into a fantastic and maze-like tableau that contrasts fascinatingly with the nascent city life that he depicts in Philadelphia. This urban fantastic contains the future echoes of H.P. Lovecraft's Arkham. He also wrote Wieland, or The Transformation. This is my Penguin copy from the early 90s. And Edgar Huntly, or The Memoirs of a Sleepwalker, which I bought and read in 1989. As I said in the introduction of the video, Brown's work is best described as uncanny. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, described the uncanny as the species of the frightening that goes back to what was once well known and had long been familiar, hence the homely, the unhomely. And in his famous examination of E.T.A. Hoffmann's weird tale The Sandman, Freud found it easy to include the uncanny in his work on psychoanalysis, in which events and repressed fears from childhood reassert themselves through these feelings of unhomeliness. This take on the uncanny manifests itself in all kinds of unexpected places in art. For example, when asked to describe the music of his band The Doors, singer and lyricist Jim Morrison described it as the feeling of somebody discomforted, somebody not quite at home. Which is not to say that these books are just subtly terrifying, for they have moments of visceral violence and the macabre as well. My first experience of reading Brockden Brown was reading this Edgar Huntly back in the late 80s. And the titular character is a deeply disturbed man, and he is disturbed by the unsolved murder of his friend Waldegrave. Unable to sleep one night, Edgar Huntly leaves the family farm and makes a pilgrimage to the elm tree where his friend's body was found. There he sees somebody digging and weeping, and he suspects that this person may be the killer. And following the possible assassin, Huntly realises that his quarry is sleepwalking, and he follows the somnambulist to see if any clues arise that will confirm these suspicions. Later, when both men are wide awake, Huntly confronts the suspect, and a new narrative arises from the latter's statement, a story that does not lead to a confession of murder, but to another act of violence in another country. Edgar Huntly bears all the marks of the late 18th century in its prose style. It's archaic to a degree, but it's also startlingly clear, and you can see the influence upon Poe, Hawthorne, Melville, and even Lovecraft. Every conversation in the book is an interview, and something like a mountain lion would be described archaically as a panther. Those are just two examples. However, an outre atmosphere creeps into the book due to the grasp of the uncanny that Brown displays beyond the somnambulist's eerie sleepwalking tendency. There is something hidden in Huntly's own behaviour. Is Huntly an unreliable narrator, or is there a secret he does not know about himself? In the next part of the book, the story takes a bizarre turn as Huntly steps into an eldritch world that may be as much of his unconscious as of reality. So I want to avoid spoilers, so I won't say any more. Suffice to say that the revelations and atmosphere that further unfolds as the novel moves forward seems staggeringly contemporary. I am reminded of the legerdemain of Christopher Priest's science fiction, the clash of political reflection and subterranean dreaminess of Herbert Reed's fantasy novel The Green Child, and the frozen tension of Anna Kavan's classic catastrophe novel Ice. In Edgar Huntly, there is maximum darkness, blood and terror in the story. It's also one of the most undeniably modern books I've read from the late 18th century, and it came as no surprise to me when I discovered that Mary Shelley read and reread it while she was writing both Frankenstein and her catastrophe novel The Last Man. Yes, Shelley too was a Brockden Brown fan, just as much as he himself had been a fan of her father William Godwin's writings. It's worth saying that although Brown was writing in the late Enlightenment and he was engaged with its civic ideas, he was also a champion of romanticism in Edgar Huntly, where the irrational and weird form a quiet white noise susurration early in the novel, only to roar out in an engulfing wave at its climax. Before I discuss Wieland, Brockden Brown's other great Gothic horror novel, it's worth mentioning that both these books feature, to contemporary eyes, the novelty of conflicts with Native Americans as episodes of great significance in their texts. Clashes with First Nation inhabitants arise in both Edgar Huntly and Wieland, which makes the reader feel as if they're flipping from weird fiction to the territory of the Western, and this only serves to make the books feel stranger and more uniquely refreshing in their oddness. It's worth remembering that later American horror writers, for example Stephen King in Pet Sematary, were not above recalling ancient Indian burial grounds and curses in their stories. In Wieland, the titular character, Theodore Wieland, is a dangerously disturbed figure. He hears voices in the night, initially cryptic warnings, and then urgings to slaughter his entire family. His sister Clara, who is narrator of the novel, is initially sceptical of Theodore's experiences, but begins to witness phenomena that led credence to her brother's obsessions. Of course, as in any great Freudian Gothic family, the entire family is haunted. Their father was a German emigre who had come to America to enjoy its religious freedoms with a plan to found his own religion. But his failure to convert the local Native Americans is self-interpreted as a failing of his God, and while praying alone in his makeshift temple, he spontaneously combusts. So the background of auditory hallucination, or are they hallucinations, inexplicable phenomena, and their would-be cult leader God-bothering daddy bursting into flames again seem to be laying the ground for the future tropes of American horror fiction. You know, we think of things like Firestarter, for example. But again, there is an unsettling psychological factor at play in the form of Carwin, a mysterious stranger who has ingratiated himself with the menage of the Wielands, a man with an uncanny ability that I won't mention here to avoid spoilers. Brockden Brown also wrote an uncompleted sequel to Wieland entitled The Memoirs of Carwin the Billiquist, and this is included in most contemporary editions of Wieland. In Brockden Brown's work, we see the psychological roots of the great horror fiction of Poe, Ligotti, and many others. He was the master of naturalized fantasy, of the stories that eventually offers a natural explanation for apparently supernatural events, but those explanations in themselves remain frighteningly unbalancing in the implication that they are indeed real phenomena. So while Freud tried to ground the uncanny in the repressed memories of home, Jung saw it as reductive. He said that the golden gleam of artistic creation was extinguished as soon as we applied the same corrosive method which we use in analysing the fantasies of hysteria. And of course Jung was right. Freud's rationalist psychoanalytic method cannot dispel or explain away the eeriness of Brockden Brown's milieu. The eerie being the intrusion of something implicable where there should be nothing. It is not fear of what is not there, but fear of something which shouldn't be there, but it is. I hope you've enjoyed this brief insight into two of the key works of one of America's most forgotten and most neglected writers, whose influence was so great that it needs to be celebrated again today. He truly is one of the most obscure writers out there, but well worth your attention whether you like horror, weird fiction, science fiction, fantasy, or even just the good old-fashioned mainstream classic novel. He really is an important figure. Anyway, thanks for watching. Do subscribe, like and comment to Outlaw Bookseller, and I'll see you again soon. And in the meantime, look out for some Brockden Brown. He'll blow your mind. Bye for now.